My name is Nova, and I'm 27 years old. The story I'm about to tell you is the story of my life, or rather, how my first life ended and my real one began. It started at a family dinner, with a few simple words that were meant to destroy me. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. The silverware clinked against my mother's best porcelain plates, a sound I'd heard every Sunday for as long as I could remember. It was a sharp, delicate sound, one that always felt too fragile for the heavy silence in our house. Candles flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the polished dining table. The rich, savory scent of roast beef filled the air, a smell that was supposed to mean comfort, family, and home. For me, it only ever smelled like an obligation. It was our traditional Sunday dinner. It was the one thing I never missed. Not since I'd moved out for college and then into my own small apartment downtown. I came back every single week, no matter how exhausted I was from my job, no matter how much I dreaded the 2 hours of forced smiles and polite nods. It was what a good daughter did, and I had spent my entire life trying to be a good daughter. Mom, whose name is Sandra, sat at the head of the table. She was in her element, the queen in her castle. She wore a silk blouse and that same smug smile that never, ever reached her eyes. It was a smile of satisfaction, of knowing everything was exactly where she wanted it to be. Dad, Mark, sat to her right, meticulously carving the roast. He focused on the task with an intensity that bordered on surgical, his shoulders hunched slightly. He was avoiding confrontation, which was less of a hobby for him and more of a full-time job. And my older brother Ryan sat across from me. At 29, he was the golden child, the success story. He was already a regional manager at some logistics firm, and he never let anyone forget it. He scrolled through his phone, his thumb moving in a lazy, rhythmic swipe, pretending to be too busy, too important for simple family talk. And then there was me. I sat quietly, trying to blend in with the wallpaper. I made myself small, took small bites of food, and hoped that if I was quiet enough, no one would notice I was there. My strategy was simple: be invisible. It was a skill I had perfected over 27 years of practice. Usually it worked. Tonight, Mom decided otherwise. "Nova," she said suddenly. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the low chatter and the clinking of forks. Everyone stopped. Dad paused his carving. Ryan's thumb froze mid-swipe. All eyes were on me. I swallowed the piece of potato in my mouth. It felt like a stone going down. "Yes, Mom? You're still working at that tiny marketing agency, right?" she asked. She said the word tiny as if it were something dirty. I nodded, keeping my eyes on my plate. I picked up my fork and pushed a green bean around. "Yes, Mom, it's going well." "Going well?" she scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Your brother just got promoted. He's a regional manager now. He has 100 people working under him. And you're still wasting your time at some startup that no one has ever heard of. When are you going to do something that actually matters?" I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, the familiar sting behind my eyes. I blinked it back and forced a polite smile. It was the one I kept in my pocket for just these occasions. "I'm happy for Ryan. My job is good for me. I'm learning a lot." "Learning what?" "How to get coffee for your boss." Ryan snickered from across the table, not even looking up from his phone. "That's enough, Ryan," Dad mumbled, but his voice had no authority. It was a puff of air, gone before it could have any effect. Mom wasn't done. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Honestly, I should have known. You've always been different." My stomach dropped. It wasn't the first time I'd heard that word. My whole life I was different. I was the quiet one while Ryan was loud. I was the artistic one while he was athletic. I was the sensitive one while he was tough. The word had always been used to dismiss me, to mark me as less than, but the way she said it tonight felt different. It was heavier. It was loaded with something dark and ugly, something she had been holding back for a very long time. It was meant to hurt. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked. My voice was quiet, much quieter than I wanted it to be. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even blink. She looked me straight in the eye, and the smug smile was gone, replaced by a look of cold, hard satisfaction. "It means you're not my real daughter, Nova, and I'm tired of pretending you are." The world stopped. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. The flicker of the candle flames seemed to freeze mid-air. I could feel the blood drain from my face. Dad's carving knife slipped, making a loud scratching sound against the porcelain plate. Ryan finally looked up from his phone, his mouth slightly open. "What?" My voice was a whisper, a tiny thread of sound in the crushing silence. Mom leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. She looked triumphant, as if she had just won a long and difficult battle. "You're adopted. We took you in as a favor to a family friend who got into some trouble. But raising you has been nothing but one disappointment after another. You don't fit in. You never did. You're not one of us." Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking me in the chest. A favor? Disappointment. Not one of us. My throat went dry. It wasn't just the shock of the words themselves. It was the venom in her tone. It was the way she said favor like I was a piece of secondhand furniture she'd been forced to take. The way she said disappointment with 27 years of resentment behind it. I was charity, not family. I looked at my brother. Ryan looked away, staring at the wall behind me, his jaw tight. His silence was his agreement. It was louder than her cruelty. I looked at my dad. He was staring down at the roast beef, his face pale and slack. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He wouldn't defend me. He never had. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The part of me that had always been desperate for their approval, the part that had twisted itself into knots trying to please them, simply vanished. It was like a string had been cut, and a weight I didn't even know I was carrying fell away. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. I pushed my chair back, and the sound of its legs scraping against the hardwood floor was deafening. "Thank you for dinner," I said. My voice was calm. It was steady. It was certain. It didn't tremble at all. Mom frowned, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together. She was confused. This wasn't the reaction she had expected. She had wanted tears. She had wanted screaming. She had wanted a scene. I wasn't giving it to her. "That's it? After everything I just told you? You're just going to leave?" I met her eyes. For the first time in my life, I didn't shrink away from her gaze. I held it. "You've already said everything that needed to be said," and I turned around and walked out. I didn't run. I didn't slam the door. I walked down the hallway, past the photos on the wall of a family I was never really a part of. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cool night air. It felt clean, fresh. I walked down the driveway to my car, got in, and drove away. No shouting, no tears, just silence. It was the kind of deep, profound silence that ends one life and begins another. Because what my mother, in her moment of cruel triumph, didn't know was that she hadn't wounded me. She had just handed me my freedom on a silver platter. She thought she was revealing a secret. But I already knew the truth, and I was just waiting for her to be cruel enough to say it to my face. It all started with an accident, a simple, mundane request. It was a Saturday afternoon 6 months before my world officially shattered at the dinner table. Dad had called me, his voice tinny over the phone, asking if I could come over and help him find some old tax files from the 90s. He said his back was acting up, and he didn't want to be climbing up and down the basement stairs. I agreed, of course. I was the good daughter, always available, always willing to help. The basement was exactly as I remembered it, a concrete tomb for forgotten things. It smelled of damp earth, dust, and cedar from the moth-repellent blocks Mom scattered in every corner. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile, buzzing glow on stacks of cardboard boxes. Old furniture draped in white sheets like sleeping ghosts, and shelves filled with jars of preserved peaches that had to be at least a decade old. Dad pointed me toward a leaning tower of boxes in the far corner. "They should be in one of those," he said, before retreating upstairs to the safety of his armchair. I spent the next hour digging through a history of our family's finances. Box after box of receipts, bank statements, and tax returns. My hands were covered in a fine layer of gray dust. It was mind-numbingly boring, but I pushed on, determined to find what he needed so I could get out of there. Finally, at the very bottom of the stack, I found a box that was different. It wasn't a standard cardboard moving box. It was a heavy-duty document box, the kind lawyers use, with a hinged lid and metal-reinforced corners. Taped across the top was a yellowed piece of paper with my mother's sharp, angry handwriting on it. It said, "Private, do not open." My heart gave a little thump. I knew I should have just pushed it aside and kept looking for the tax files, but I couldn't. All my life, I had been surrounded by unspoken rules and invisible walls. There were things you just didn't talk about in the Winters household. There were feelings you didn't show, and there were doors you did not open. This box was one of those doors. Curiosity, for once, was stronger than my fear of upsetting my mother. My hands trembled slightly as I peeled back the old brittle tape. The lid creaked open. The first thing I saw was a file folder with my name on it. Nova. Inside were papers. Lots of them. I pulled out the first one. It was my birth certificate. My name was there, Nova Winters. My date of birth. My parents' names, Mark and Sandra Winters. It all looked normal, except for one small detail in the corner. The space for the attending physician was blank. That was odd. Beneath the birth certificate were hospital records. They were thin, just a few pages noting my weight, height, and a clean bill of health. But they were from a small private clinic 2 towns over, one I had never heard of. Why wouldn't I have been born in the main hospital everyone else went to? Then, at the very bottom of the box, I found a bundle of letters, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. They were not in my mother's handwriting or my father's. The paper was thick and expensive, like something from a fancy stationery store. I untied the ribbon and unfolded the top letter. My eyes scanned the page, and the words seemed to leap out at me, rearranging everything I thought I knew about myself. The letterhead was embossed with a crest, a silver shield with a hawk in the center, its wings outstretched. Beneath it, in elegant script, were 2 words, the Linfields. My blood ran cold. I froze. Everyone in the state, maybe even the country, knew that name. The Linfields owned Linfield Corporation, a massive tech empire that had its hands in everything from software to aerospace engineering. They were practically royalty in our part of the world, unimaginably wealthy, powerful, and intensely private. The letter was dated 27 years ago, just a few weeks after I was born. It was addressed to Mark and Sandra Winters. I read the first line, my hand shaking so badly the paper rattled. To the Winters family, thank you for taking Nova during this transition. We trust she is settling in well. As we discussed, discretion is of the utmost importance. We will arrange for the first of the monthly payments to be transferred as agreed upon by the end of the week. This arrangement will continue until custody is formalized. Please ensure no public records reflect her true heritage. I had to read it 3 times before the meaning sank in. Monthly payments, custody, heritage, discretion. The words echoed in the damp, silent basement. I sank down onto a dusty old trunk, the letter still in my hands. It wasn't just that I was adopted. That would have been a shock, but this was something else entirely. This wasn't an adoption. It was an arrangement, a transaction. I hadn't been chosen out of love by a couple desperate for a child. I had been placed. I had been hidden, and my so-called parents had been paid to do it. A cold, heavy stone settled in the pit of my stomach. Every dismissive comment from my mother, every time she called me different, every moment I felt like an outsider in my own home, it all clicked into place. I wasn't just imagining it. I was an outsider. I was their dirty little secret, their monthly paycheck. I carefully put the letters back in the box, tied the ribbon, closed the lid, and pushed it back to the bottom of the stack, exactly where I had found it. I found the tax files my dad wanted in another box and took them upstairs. Find them? He asked, not looking up from the television. Yes, I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. They were at the bottom. I went home that day and felt like a ghost in my own life. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. My eyes, a shade of blue-gray that nobody else in my family had. My hair, a dark brown that wasn't like my mother's blonde or my father's reddish-brown. All the little things that had made me feel disconnected now seemed like glaring, obvious clues. I wasn't just adopted. I had been hidden. And as I sat in my quiet apartment that night, a new, fierce feeling began to grow in the emptiness inside me. It was a burning need to know the truth. Who were the Linfields? And why did they give me away? For the next few weeks, I lived in a fog. During the day, I went to work at the marketing agency, sat in meetings, wrote copy, and smiled at my colleagues. I went through the motions of my old life, but my mind was elsewhere. It was in that dusty box in the basement, turning over the words in that letter again and again. Monthly payments, discretion, true heritage. At night, my real work began. My small apartment became a command center. I spent hours hunched over my laptop, diving headfirst into the rabbit hole of the Linfield family. They were notoriously private, but their company, Linfield Corporation, was very public. I read every article, every press release, every shareholder report I could find. I learned about their corporate structure, their philanthropic work, and their public history. The family was headed by a formidable patriarch, an old man named Theodore Linfield, who had built the empire from the ground up. He had one son, Alexander Linfield, who was now the CEO. I searched for any mention of a scandal, a death, a secret child from 27 years ago. I found nothing. The Linfields had a pristine public image, carefully curated over decades. It was a digital fortress. Trying to find a crack was exhausting and demoralizing. I felt like I was chasing ghosts. There were days I almost gave up, convinced I would never find the truth, that I was destined to be Nova Winters, the disappointing, out-of-place daughter, forever. But then, I had an idea. I couldn't breach the fortress from the outside, but maybe I could find someone on the inside. I started searching for employees of Linfield Corporation on professional networking sites. I looked for people who had been with the company for a long time, people in executive support roles who might know the family's secrets. It took weeks of patient searching, but eventually I found a name, Grace. She was listed as the personal assistant to the CEO, Alexander Linfield. She had been with the company for over 30 years. If anyone knew anything, it would be her. My heart pounded as I drafted an email. I rewrote it a dozen times, terrified of saying the wrong thing. I couldn't just blurt out that I thought I was the CEO's secret daughter. She would delete it and flag my email as spam, or worse, have their lawyers send me a cease and desist letter. I had to be careful, vague but intriguing. I settled on a simple, direct subject line, personal inquiry regarding a matter from 27 years ago. In the body of the email, I wrote that I had recently discovered documents connecting my birth to the Linfield family, and that I believed it was a matter of extreme personal importance. I gave my name and phone number. Then, with a deep breath, I hit send. For 2 months, I heard nothing. I checked my email 100 times a day. Every notification made my heart leap into my throat, only to be followed by the familiar sting of disappointment. I started to lose hope. I had taken my shot, and I had missed. Then, one rainy Tuesday morning, a reply appeared in my inbox. The sender was simply G. The message was short and cryptic. Meet me at the Atrium Cafe downtown. Thursday, 2 p.m. Come alone. My hands were shaking as I drove downtown that Thursday. The Atrium Cafe was a quiet, elegant place with high ceilings and lots of natural light, the kind of place where people had hushed important conversations. I spotted her immediately. She was an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and perfectly styled gray hair. She sat at a small table in the corner, a cup of tea untouched in front of her. I walked over and introduced myself. Grace? She nodded and gestured for me to sit. She didn't smile. She just watched me, her gaze intense and analytical, as if she were trying to see something beneath the surface. We didn't exchange pleasantries. After a moment of heavy silence, she slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the table. He's been looking for you, she said, her voice soft but firm. And that was all. She stood up, left a $10 bill on the table for her tea, and walked out of the cafe without another word. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the envelope. My name, Nova, was written on the front in strong, bold handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten on the same expensive paper I had found in the basement, bearing the same hawk crest. It was from Alexander Linfield, my biological father. My eyes filled with tears as I read his words. He told me everything. He wrote about my mother, Elise, an artist he had loved more than life itself. He wrote about their plans to get married, plans that were shattered when she was killed in a sudden, tragic car accident just weeks after I was born. He wrote about his father, Theodore, a powerful and controlling man who saw me, the child of a woman he hadn't approved of, as a threat to the family's reputation and legacy. Theodore had forced Alexander to give me up, arranging for me to be placed with a trustworthy couple from their town, the Winters, until the scandal died down. It was supposed to be temporary, but the Winters had taken the money, moved away a few years later, changed their numbers, and stopped responding to his letters. They had vanished, and they had taken me with them. Alexander had been searching for me ever since his father passed away, and he took control of the company. I wasn't a child given away. I was a child who was stolen. The letter ended with a simple, desperate plea. I know I can't make up for the years we've lost, but I need to see you. Please give me a chance to explain. Give me a chance to know my daughter. He had included his personal cell phone number at the bottom. The next week, after reading the letter 100 times, I called him. A man answered on the first ring, his voice deep and warm, but filled with an unmistakable nervousness. We scheduled a meeting. When I walked into his penthouse apartment overlooking the entire city, my breath caught in my throat. The place was vast and beautiful, with floor-to-ceiling windows and walls covered in stunning art, but I barely noticed any of it. My eyes were fixed on the man standing in the middle of the room. He was tall and handsome, with dark hair threaded with silver at the temples, and he had my eyes. The same blue-gray color, the same shape. It was like looking into a distorted mirror. He stood frozen for a moment, his own eyes wide with emotion. Then he whispered, his voice thick, "You look just like her. You look just like your mother." We sat and talked for hours. The sun set outside the windows, and the city lights began to glitter below, but we didn't notice. He told me stories about my mother, Elise. He described her laugh, her passion for painting, her stubborn spirit. He showed me pictures of her. In every one, she was vibrant and full of life. He spoke of his regret, of the guilt he had carried for 27 years. It was a raw, honest confession. Then he looked at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears, and said the words that changed everything. "I don't want to just make up for lost time, Nova. I want to make things right. This company, this legacy, it should have been yours. It still can be." He offered me a position. Not some token job, but a real apprenticeship at Linfield Corporation, working directly under him. He wanted to teach me everything, to show me the world I was supposed to have been a part of. He wanted to give me my birthright back. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. I felt wanted. I felt real. And without a single doubt in my mind, I said yes. For the next 6 months, I lived a double life. It felt like I was a spy in my own story, playing two completely different characters. To my adoptive family, I was still just Nova, the disappointing daughter. I was the one who worked at a tiny agency, the one who wasn't as successful as Ryan, the one who was wasting her potential. I would talk to them on the phone once a week, and the conversations were always the same. Mom would ask pointed questions about my job, her tone dripping with disapproval. "Are you still fetching coffee for your boss, dear?" she'd ask, her voice falsely sweet. Dad would say a few meaningless words about the weather. I would give them vague, polite answers, letting them believe that nothing in my life had changed. I never missed a Sunday dinner, sitting at their table and pretending to be the same invisible girl I had always been. It was the hardest acting job of my life, but every weekday I would put on a different costume. I traded my simple work clothes for tailored business suits. I would drive my modest sedan to a parking garage downtown and swap it for the sleek black town car that Alexander sent for me every morning. I would walk into the gleaming glass and steel skyscraper of Linfield Tower, a place that pulsed with power and ambition. There, I wasn't Nova Winters, the marketing assistant. I was Nova Linfield, the secret heir. My real life was a whirlwind. My apprenticeship wasn't about filing papers or making copies. Alexander threw me into the deep end from day one. I sat in on board meetings, my pen flying across my notepad as I tried to keep up with discussions about billion-dollar acquisitions and global market strategy. I spent hours with the heads of every department: finance, legal, research and development, global operations. They were told only that I was a special consultant working directly for the CEO, and they were instructed to teach me everything they knew. Alexander was a brilliant teacher. He wasn't just my father. He was my mentor. He didn't just give me information. He taught me how to think. He taught me how to read a balance sheet and see the story behind the numbers. He taught me how to walk into a negotiation, project confidence I didn't feel, and control the room. One afternoon, we were in a tense meeting with a rival tech firm. They were being aggressive, trying to lowball us on a patent deal. I was just supposed to be observing, but I noticed something in their proposal, a small loophole in the language that could cost us millions down the line. I was terrified to speak up, surrounded by seasoned executives who had been doing this longer than I'd been alive. But I felt Alexander's encouraging gaze on me from across the table. I took a deep breath and pointed out the flaw. The room went silent. Our company's lawyers reviewed the clause and their eyes widened. I was right. We changed our offer, and the other team, caught off guard, folded. Walking out of that meeting, Alexander put a hand on my shoulder. "Your mother had that same eye for detail," he said, a proud smile on his face. She could see things no one else could. In that moment, I felt a connection, not just to him, but to the mother I never knew. I wasn't just learning business. I was discovering parts of myself that had been dormant my whole life. Our relationship grew beyond the boardroom. We started having lunch together every day in his private dining room. He would tell me more stories about Elise, and I would tell him about my life, about the quiet loneliness and the constant feeling of being an outsider. He listened with a painful intensity, his face filled with regret for the childhood he had missed. He was trying to piece together the daughter he had lost, just as I was trying to understand the father I had just found. It was a delicate, careful process of two strangers learning to become family. One evening, we were working late in his vast office, the city lights twinkling like a carpet of stars below us. We had been going over quarterly projections for hours, and I was exhausted but exhilarated. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me, his expression serious. "You're a natural at this, Nova," he said, his voice quiet. "You have the intelligence, the instinct, but more importantly, you have the integrity. You have your mother's heart." He paused, then continued. "When I eventually retire, this will all be yours. I want you to inherit Linfield Corporation." I stared at him, my throat suddenly tight. The scale of what he was saying was overwhelming. It wasn't just a job or a title. It was a legacy. It was a kingdom, and he was offering it to me. I thought I would cry, but I didn't. Instead, a powerful sense of purpose settled over me, a feeling of rightness, as if a piece of my soul that had been missing had finally clicked into place. Finally, someone saw me, not as a burden, not as a disappointment, but as a future. I smiled through the lump in my throat. "I won't let you down," I whispered. From that day on, something inside me changed. I walked taller. I spoke with more confidence. The timid, invisible girl who used to blend into the wallpaper was fading away. In her place, someone new was emerging, someone stronger. I was shedding the skin of Nova Winters and finally, truly, becoming Nova Linfield. I knew a confrontation with the Winters family was inevitable, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. Part 5. The Dinner That Broke the Silence. The day of that final Sunday dinner, I woke up feeling strangely calm. For the past 6 months, I had been dreading this inevitable collision of my two worlds. But that morning, getting ready in my apartment, I felt a sense of quiet clarity. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple, elegant dark blue dress. It was understated but professional. It was a suit of armor. I still went to that dinner because I needed to see it through to the end. I needed to close that chapter of my life myself, on my own terms. For years, I had gone to these dinners seeking some crumb of affection or approval. Tonight, I was going for a different reason. I was going as an observer, a scientist studying a strange and dysfunctional species in its natural habitat. I was going to get the one thing I now knew they were capable of giving me, the truth of their feelings, spoken aloud. When I walked in, the atmosphere was as tense as ever. Mom gave my dress a critical once-over. Ryan grunted a hello without looking up from his phone. Dad gave me a weak, watery smile. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. I was no longer the nervous girl desperate to please them. I was the CEO in training of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I knew things they couldn't possibly imagine. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. Only I knew it. I sat at the table, a calm spectator at my own execution. When my mother started her usual attacks, comparing me to Ryan, belittling my job, I didn't feel the familiar sting of hurt. I felt a strange sense of pity for her. Her world was so small, her sense of worth so tied to her son's conventional success, and her daughter's perceived failure. I listened to her words, but what I was really hearing was my own internal analysis. This is a tactic to assert dominance. This is a projection of her own insecurities. Alexander had taught me to see the strategy behind the words, and I could suddenly see my mother's tactics with perfect, cold clarity. She wasn't just being cruel, she was being predictable. So when she finally spat out those fateful words, "It means you're not my real daughter, Nova, and I'm tired of pretending you are," I didn't feel the shock or the pain she expected. I felt relief. It was a profound, cleansing release, as if a pressure valve inside my chest had finally been opened. The lie was over. The pretense was done. She thought she was wounding me, but she was setting me free. She thought she was casting me out, but she was just opening the door I was already prepared to walk through. I looked at my father's cowardly refusal to meet my eyes, and my brother's guilty silence, and I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. They were strangers to me, and had been for a long time. My calm departure wasn't an act of weakness. It was an act of power. I was refusing to play her game anymore. As I drove away from that house for the last time, I didn't cry. The cold night air rushing through my open window felt like a baptism. I was washing away 27 years of feeling like I wasn't enough. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed and felt light. The heavy weight of their expectations, an anchor I had been dragging around my entire life, was gone. I made coffee and stood by my window watching the sun rise over the city, my city. While the Winters family was likely sitting in a state of shock or righteous anger, my real life was about to begin. At exactly 9 a.m., I was sitting in my office at Linfield Tower. It wasn't a grand corner office yet, but it was mine, with a sleek desk and a view of the skyline. Alexander and I had prepared for this moment for weeks. The plan was in motion. At 9:01 a.m., Grace walked in and gave me a quiet nod. "It's done," she said. The official press release from Linfield Corporation went out. I opened my laptop and watched the headlines appear on news sites, one after another. Linfield Corporation announces new heir, CEO's long-lost daughter, Nova Linfield. The secret daughter, Alexander Linfield, reveals 27-year-old secret. From obscurity to heiress. The incredible story of Nova Linfield. The internet exploded. My phone, which had been silent all morning, began to light up like a Christmas tree. The screen flashed with incoming calls, one after another. Mom, Dad, Ryan. Mom again. Dad. A text from Ryan. "What is going on? Call me!" I looked at the buzzing phone on my desk. I watched their names flash on the screen, a frantic, desperate plea for my attention. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, I reached over and pressed the silence button. The screen went dark. The buzzing stopped. I turned back to my computer, took a sip of my coffee, and started my first official day of work. The silence was the most powerful sound I had ever heard. The 3 days after the news broke were a blur of organized chaos. My life, which for months had been a secret neatly tucked away, was now international headline news. The story was irresistible. The long-lost heiress, the secret adoption, the dramatic return. It was a modern-day fairy tale, and I was at the center of it. My phone didn't stop ringing, but it wasn't the Winters family anymore. It was reporters, news anchors, and producers from morning talk shows. I was shielded from all of it by Linfield Corporation's formidable public relations team. a group of sharp, efficient people who moved with the precision of a military unit. They drafted statements, arranged a single, carefully controlled interview, and built a protective wall around me. Inside that wall, I was busier than I had ever been. Alexander was by my side constantly, not as a CEO, but as a father. He guided me through the storm, his calm presence a steady anchor. We met with lawyers to formalize my legal name change and my position in the company. We met with the board of directors, where Alexander officially presented me as his successor. I looked into the faces of some of the most powerful people in the country, and I didn't flinch. I answered their questions with the knowledge and confidence I had spent the last 6 months earning. I was no longer an apprentice. I was an executive. Through it all, I was waiting. I knew they would come. The Winters family couldn't stand being ignored. Their silence was a coiled spring, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it snapped. I spent my evenings in my new apartment, a beautiful space on the 30th floor of a building not far from the Linfield Tower. It was a place Alexander had arranged for me, a home that was truly mine. It was quiet, peaceful, and safe. I would stand at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights, and I would prepare myself. I rehearsed the conversation in my head, not out of fear, but out of a need for strategy. I would not be emotional. I would not be vengeful. I would be final. The call came on the third day, a Thursday afternoon. I was in my new corner office, the one that had belonged to a retiring executive vice president. It was a large, airy space with a breathtaking view of the city. My intercom buzzed. It was the head of security from the front lobby. Ms. Linfield. His voice was professionally calm. There is a family here claiming to be your relatives. Mark, Sandra, and Ryan Winters. They are demanding to see you. I felt a moment of absolute stillness. The waiting was over. I leaned back in my large leather chair, the chair that symbolized everything I had become. I felt no fear, no anxiety, just a quiet, powerful sense of control. Send them up, I said. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the traffic moving far below. They were my past, coming to visit my present. A present they could never have imagined for me. When the door to my office opened, I didn't turn around immediately. I let them enter. I let them see the space. I let them feel how small and out of place they were in my new world. Finally, I turned. They stood there like ghosts, pale and bewildered. Sandra, my former mother, looked haggard. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a desperate, fearful energy. Her eyes darted around the office, taking in the expensive art on the walls, the massive mahogany desk, the sheer scale of the room. Dad hovered behind her, his hands shoved in his pockets, his shoulders slumped in a permanent posture of defeat. And Ryan, the golden boy, looked lost. His usual arrogance had vanished. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, as if he were seeing me for the first time. Sandra found her voice first. It was a different voice than the one she had used at dinner. It was soft, trembling, and utterly fake. Nova, she started, taking a tentative step forward. Oh, Nova, we were so worried. When we saw the news, we didn't know what to think. We didn't mean what we said the other night. We were just angry. You know how I get. I didn't move. I remained standing by the window, letting her words hang in the air and evaporate. I leaned back against the desk. You were honest, Sandra, I said. My voice was even and calm. Using her first name felt like drawing a final, unshakable boundary. For the first time in a very long time, you said what you truly felt. She flinched as if I had slapped her. That's not true. We love you. You're our daughter. Am I? I asked, raising an eyebrow. You seemed pretty clear on that point last Sunday. Her face began to crumble, the soft, pleading mask falling away to reveal the familiar anger beneath. You can't seriously believe these people, she spat, gesturing wildly around the office as if Alexander were hiding behind a plant. They're lying to you. They're trying to use you. We're your family. We raised you. Believe? I said quietly. I walked slowly from the window to my desk, the gentle click of my heels on the marble floor the only sound in the room. I sat down in my chair, the position of ultimate authority. They were standing. I was sitting. I don't have to believe anything. I have proof. I opened a drawer in my desk and pulled out a slim file folder. I opened it and slid a piece of paper across the vast, polished surface of the desk. It was a copy of the first letter from the Linfields. I found your little box in the basement, Sandra, I said. The one marked private. I saw the letters. All of them. I then slid another paper across the desk. It was a bank statement from 27 years ago, showing the first large deposit from a holding company owned by the Linfields. I also had my father's legal team pull your financial records. They found every single one of the monthly payments you took. You didn't just hide me. You sold me piece by piece, month by month for 27 years. Sandra's face went white. She looked at the papers as if they were venomous snakes. Ryan took a step back, shaking his head in disbelief. He looked at his parents with a new, horrified understanding. It was Dad who finally spoke, his voice cracking. "We raised you," he repeated, the same pathetic defense. "We put a roof over your head. We fed you." I looked at him, at this weak, hollow man I had once called my father. "No," I said, my voice cutting through his excuse like a scalpel. "You didn't raise me. You housed me. You collected me. I was a transaction, an investment that you complained about for years, not knowing it was about to pay out a dividend you could never have imagined." The room fell into a dead, crushing silence. The truth was out, laid bare on the polished surface of my desk. They had no lies left to hide behind. I pushed another thicker folder across the desk toward them. "That," I said, "is a settlement agreement." Sandra stared at it blankly. "A settlement?" "I've instructed the Linfield Corporation's acquisition department to make you an offer," I explained, my tone as neutral as if I were discussing the weather. "We are buying out your small logistics consulting business, the one Ryan is so proud of. We are offering you twice its market value. The money will be deposited in your account within 24 hours of you signing those papers. Consider it a final payment. Severance pay for 25 years of pretending to be my family?" Sandra's eyes widened, a flicker of greed warring with her shock and humiliation. "Ryan looked like he was going to be sick. You can't," she started, her voice a strangled whisper. "I already did," I interrupted, my voice firm and final. "Sign the papers, take the money, and you will never have to see or hear from me again. You will be free of your disappointment. Isn't that what you've always wanted?" They stood there for another minute, utterly broken. Sandra finally reached out a trembling hand and pulled the folder toward her. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. Without another word, they turned and walked out of my office. The door clicked shut behind them, and I was alone. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I just felt quiet. It was the quiet of a war that had finally ended. For a long time after the door clicked shut, I didn't move. I sat in my enormous leather chair listening to the silence. The confrontation I had been anticipating for months was over, and it had been nothing like I had imagined. There was no screaming, no dramatic tears. It was just a quiet, brutal transaction. A business deal. I had bought my freedom, and the price had been to finally and completely shatter the illusion that we were ever a family. I expected to feel a surge of victory, a rush of triumphant satisfaction, but I didn't. Instead, I felt a profound emptiness. It wasn't a painful void, but a clean one. It was the space left behind after something toxic and heavy had been surgically removed. I swiveled my chair to face the massive window, looking out at the endless expanse of the city below. For 27 years, a huge part of my energy, both conscious and subconscious, had been dedicated to managing the Winters family, trying to earn their love, trying to avoid their criticism, trying to understand their disappointment. Now all of that was gone. The space it occupied in my soul was now empty, waiting to be filled with something new, something of my own choosing. I took a deep, slow breath and felt, for the first time, truly and completely free. That evening, I stood in Alexander's office. His was a corner office on the top floor, with a view that seemed to encompass the entire world. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. We stood side by side at the window, not speaking, just watching the day end. "How do you feel?" he asked finally, his voice gentle. I thought for a moment, trying to find the right word. "Empty," I admitted, "but not in a bad way. It feels clean." I turned to look at him. "And free." "I feel free?" He nodded, a soft, understanding smile on his face. "Good, because you've earned more than freedom, Nova. You've earned your future." He walked over to his desk and picked up a handsome, leather-bound folder. He brought it back to me and held it out. "This is for you. It's official." I took it from him. My hands were steady. I opened it. Inside, on thick embossed paper, was my official letter of appointment. It read, "Nova Linfield, Executive Vice President of Corporate Strategy, Linfield Corporation." Seeing my real name, my new title, written out in such a formal, permanent way, made it real. This wasn't a temporary apprenticeship. This wasn't a dream. This was my life now. For the first time, my name, Nova Linfield, looked exactly where it belonged. I traced the letters with my fingertip, a lump forming in my throat. This was more than a job. It was an identity. It was a promise. It was home. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. My new role came with immense responsibility, and I poured all of my newfound energy into it. I led meetings. I analyzed international market trends. I made decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of dollars. There was no time to dwell on the past. I was too busy building my future. The public attention was intense, but I learned to navigate it. With the help of the PR team and Alexander's guidance, I conducted a few select interviews. I told a simplified version of my story, focusing not on the betrayal of the Winters family, but on the joy of finding my real one. I spoke about my mother, Elise, and my commitment to honoring her legacy. I was no longer a victim in a sad story. I was the competent, confident new face of a powerful corporation. One of the most significant changes was internal. I started to trust my own voice. In meetings, I no longer hesitated to speak up, to challenge an old idea or propose a new one. I had spent my entire life making myself smaller, trying to be invisible. Now I was learning to take up space. I was discovering a strength in myself I never knew I had. It wasn't an aggressive or loud strength, but a quiet, steady confidence. It was the strength of knowing who you are and what you are capable of. Sometimes, in a quiet moment, the past would surface. I'd be reviewing a financial report and suddenly remember the dusty smell of the basement where I first found the letters. Or I'd be at a formal dinner and the clink of silverware would transport me back to that last Sunday dinner. But the memories no longer had power over me. They were just data points on a chart, moments that had led me from where I was to where I am now. They were the first chapter of a book that was getting more interesting with every page. The empty space inside me was beginning to fill up, not with anger or resentment, but with purpose, ambition, and a quiet, growing sense of peace. A week after the confrontation in my office, a week after I had signed away my past and officially stepped into my future, I received the voicemail. I was in my apartment preparing for bed. It had been a long, grueling day of back-to-back meetings, and I was looking forward to the quiet embrace of sleep. My phone, which I usually kept on silent during the day, was sitting on my nightstand. As I plugged it in to charge, the screen lit up with a notification. One new voicemail. My heart didn't leap. I didn't feel a jolt of anxiety. I simply felt a weary curiosity. I knew with a deep certainty who it was from. I pressed the play button and held the phone to my ear. Sandra's voice filled the quiet room. It was shaky and thin, a ghost of its former sharp, commanding tone. It was the voice of someone who had been crying. "Nova," she began, her voice cracking on my name. It's me. I saw your interview on the news today. The one with that famous anchor." There was a long pause, filled with the sound of a shaky intake of breath. "You look different. So confident." Another pause. "I got the money," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's in the account. It's more money than we've ever seen." She let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. It was a broken, ugly sound. "I don't know what to say," she continued, her words stumbling over each other. "Except, I'm sorry. I really am. I never thought you would make something of yourself like this. I always thought you were just drifting. I was wrong. I was so wrong." The message ended. The automated voice of the voicemail service came on, chirpy and detached. I stood motionless in my silent apartment, the phone still pressed to my ear. I listened to the message a second time, and then a third. I wasn't listening for emotion. I was analyzing it. It was a masterclass in a self-serving apology. "I saw you on the news. I got the money. I never thought you'd make something of yourself." The apology wasn't for the years of emotional neglect. It wasn't for the cruelty, the lies, or the coldness. It was an apology born of shock and awe. She wasn't sorry for how she had treated me. She was sorry that she had misjudged my potential value. She had thrown away a winning lottery ticket, and now she was staring at the jackpot on her television screen. Her regret was for her own loss, not for my pain. A part of me, a ghost of the girl I used to be, felt a faint tug of pity. She was a small, bitter woman who had built her life on a foundation of lies, and now it had all crumbled, leaving her rich, but utterly powerless. But the woman I was now, the woman who ran board meetings and shaped corporate strategy, knew that pity was a trap. Pity was a door left ajar, an invitation for the poison to seep back in. I walked over to my window and looked out at the city lights. I thought about what would happen if I called her back. I could picture the conversation perfectly. She would cry. She would tell me she loved me, that she always had. She would beg for forgiveness. And then slowly the requests would begin. Could I help Ryan get a better position? Could I invest in some new business idea for my father? Could she and I have lunch just to talk? She would try to weave her way back into my life, not because she loved me, but because I was now useful to her. The dynamic would be different. She would be fawning instead of critical, but it would be just as toxic. Some apologies are not meant for the person who was wronged. They are a desperate plea for absolution from the person who did the wronging, a way to soothe their own conscience. Calling her back would be an act of soothing her. It would be a gift to her, and I was done giving her parts of myself. My silence, I realized, was my final boundary. It was a wall she could not breach. My lack of response was the one thing she couldn't manipulate. It was a statement, louder than any angry words I could ever have shouted. It said, "You no longer have access to me. The transaction is complete. The next day, I made a call to the head of the Linfield Foundation, the company's philanthropic arm. I told him I wanted to set up a new grant in my biological mother's name, the Elise Linfield Grant for Emerging Artists. It would provide funding and mentorship for young, unknown artists who were struggling to make a name for themselves. People like my mother had been before she met Alexander. It was an act of creation, of building something beautiful and positive. It was about honoring my true heritage and looking toward the future, not getting dragged back into the wreckage of the past. That evening, I picked up my phone, navigated to the voicemail from Sandra, and listened to it one last time. Her broken, self-pitying voice filled my ear. Then I pressed the delete button. I watched the notification vanish from my screen, and just like that, she was gone. Some apologies are meant to echo unanswered, and hers would echo in the silence for the rest of her life. Sunday dinners are different now. There are no polished plates holding silent resentment. There is no tension so thick you could carve it with a steak knife. There is no one scrolling through their phone pretending to be somewhere else. The ghost of obligation has been exorcised, replaced by the warm, living presence of genuine affection. Tonight we're at Alexander's penthouse. The table is still elegant, but the atmosphere is relaxed, alive with conversation and easy laughter. The guests are a small, curated group that has become my new chosen family. Grace is here, the fiercely loyal assistant who was my first link to this new life. Her husband, a kind, witty history professor, is debating the merits of a new biography with one of the Linfield board members, an old friend of my mother's who looks at me with eyes full of gentle approval. I sit across from Alexander, watching him as he tells a funny story about a disastrous business trip in his youth. He's not the imposing CEO of Linfield Corporation right now. He's just my dad, his face relaxed and happy, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he laughs. And I'm no longer the quiet, invisible girl shrinking in her chair. I am a part of the conversation. I jump in with a teasing comment and the whole table laughs. My opinion is not just heard, it is sought. We talk about everything: corporate strategy, art, politics, silly childhood memories that Alexander and I are trying to create to fill the gaps of the ones we lost. It is a symphony of normal, happy family life, and it is a music I have never heard before. Later, as Grace and I help clear the dessert plates, Alexander comes to stand beside me at the kitchen counter. He looks out at the living room, where the others are still laughing and talking. It's good to have this house full of life again, he says quietly. After your mother, it was quiet for a very long time. I feel a familiar pang of sadness for the mother I never knew, for the years he and I lost. But tonight, the sadness is a gentle ache, not a sharp pain. It's a bittersweet reminder of how precious this new life is. We return to the table for coffee, and the conversation turns to the new grant I established in my mother's name. The board member, whose name is Eleanor, tells me that the first round of applications was overwhelming, filled with incredible young talent. You've done a wonderful thing, Nova, she says, her kind eyes shining. You have your mother's spirit. She always wanted to help people. Then Alexander looks at me from across the table, his expression soft and full of a love that is so open and unconditional it still takes my breath away sometimes. You know, he says, his voice thick with emotion, your mother would have been so proud of you. His words land directly in my heart. This is the validation I craved for 27 years, the words I desperately longed to hear from Sandra, but hearing them now from him feels completely different. It isn't a reward for being successful or for meeting some arbitrary standard. It is a simple, profound statement of love and pride in who I am as a person. It's not about what I've accomplished. It's about who I've become. A warm feeling spreads through my chest, replacing the old cold ache that had lived there for so long. I smile back at him, a real smile that reaches my eyes. I think, I say, my voice steady and clear, I finally am too. And it's true. The pride I feel isn't just about being a Linfield or an executive. I'm proud of the scared, lonely girl who was brave enough to open that box in the basement. I'm proud of the determined young woman who spent months piecing together the truth. I'm proud of the person who walked out of that toxic house with her head held high and never looked back. I didn't just inherit my future, I fought for it. I built it. We sit there for hours talking and laughing as the city lights glitter outside. For the first time, I don't feel like a guest in someone else's life. I am not an outsider looking in, I am home. This, I realize, is what a real family feels like. It's not about blood or obligation. It's about being seen, being valued, and being loved for exactly who you are. When Sandra Winters stood in her perfect dining room and told me, "You're not my real daughter," she thought she was cutting me out of her story. She thought she was erasing me, casting me out into the darkness. But really, she just wrote the first line of my new one. She was right. I wasn't her daughter. I was never meant to be. I was a secret she kept, a transaction she managed. Her final cruel words were not an ending. They were a key, unlocking a door to a life that was rightfully mine all along. I am Nova Linfield. I am the daughter of a legacy, built by a brilliant man and a woman with a spirit full of art and fire. I am the heir to an empire, not just of wealth and power, but of potential and purpose. My identity is not something that was given to me on that day the news broke. It's something I claimed. I earned it in the dusty silence of a basement, in late nights of research, in the quiet confidence of a boardroom, and in the steady, calm footsteps I took as I walked away from a life that was never meant for me. And the girl she kicked out of her house? The disappointment she was tired of pretending to love? She now owns everything her mother ever wanted. Not just the wealth, but the power, the respect, and the freedom to write her own story. And this is just the beginning. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel.